So I've got a question for you. I want you to think about the answer to this. What is it that you desire the most right now? And right now could be a number of things. Right now could be right this very moment, or right now could maybe be at the point that you are in your life right now. So you got your answer? Okay, here's what I want you to do. Whether you're in a room with your youth group or with a couple other people, or even if you're by yourself, it's okay. I want you on the count of 3 to shout out your answer all together to the question of what is it that you desire the most right now. Now, don't be too cool. You can do it, all right? So ready? 1, 2, 3. Excellent. Okay, hey, thank you. Thank you if you shouted out your answer. If you didn't shout out your answer and you just stared at me awkwardly as I sat in silence, that's okay too, because what I really wanted you to do was to think about the answer to that question. What is it that you desire the most right now? In Exodus chapter 33, God tells Moses that he's going to give his people the very thing that they desire most of all, the promised land. Now, this is something they've desired for generations. This is the thing that God promised to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, saying that he was going to give them this land. And so he tells Moses this, and you would think this would be this really exciting thing, except for the fact that there's a catch. And the catch is God says, I'm going to give you this land, but I am not going to go with you. And the reason he's not going to go with them makes sense. The reason is because he's worried because they're such a stiff-necked people that he's going to destroy them along the way. And so Moses now has a choice to make. Does he decide to lead the people into the place that they have desired to go for generations? But if he does this, that means that God is not going to go with them. So a couple years ago, I went on a road trip with my son. He was probably 2 or 3 years old. And it was just me and him, our first time doing this together. And so we're driving on this long road trip to see family. And it's going great so far, surprisingly enough. And at one point we stop at a gas station and I get him some M&Ms. And so we're driving, he's got these M&Ms in the back seat and things are going great, couldn't be better. And so guess what happens? He runs out of M&Ms. And so when he runs out of M&Ms, he wants some more M&Ms, and so he starts crying. And by crying, I mean screaming. He starts screaming and yelling, and he's saying, I want more M&Ms, I want more M&Ms, I want more M&Ms. And I'm driving, trying to keep it together, and I say, listen, we don't have any more M&Ms, buddy. I can't help you there. And he's still screaming, he's still crying because he wants more M&Ms. And finally, he realized this isn't working, and so he decides to call out for somebody else, somebody that's not even there. He starts calling out for mom. And he says, Mommy, Mommy, Mommy. I'm like, Mom isn't even here. And as we're doing this, we're having this back and forth. 2 things go through my mind. One is, I don't know if I'm going to do a road trip with my son for a while. And the second thing that goes through my mind is, does he really want his mom? And the answer is I think, no. He didn't really want his mom. What he wanted was what he thought his mom could give him. And I think sometimes we do this with God, where we say we want God, but what we really mean is we want what we think God can give us. Back in Exodus 33, Moses has this choice. Does he take his people into the promised land, this thing that they want and desire? Or does he decide, hey, we're not going to go if God doesn't go with us? And he has this great response where he tells God, listen, we are your people. We are those that you love. You have to stay with us. You have to come with us. And so God says, okay, I will go with you. I will give you rest. And then listen to this response in verse 15 and 16 of Exodus 33. Moses says, if your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? And listen to this part. Is it not in your going with us so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth? You see, I love Moses' response here because Moses basically says, God, if you don't give us anything else, that's okay, because all I want is you. Moses realized that the thing that set them apart, the thing that made them distinct from everyone else, is God's presence. Moses understood this. And I think Paul understands this as well in Philippians. We've been going through this Philippians study together, and we're coming close to the end. We're on the last chapter now. If you haven't watched the other lessons, make sure you go back and do that. But in Philippians chapter 4, turn there for just a moment. Starting in verse 4, Paul talks about, I think, the presence of God. And he talks about it, and he calls it the peace of God. Listen in verse 4 of chapter 4. It says, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Then verse 7, listen to this. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Okay, a couple things here. Here, Paul says, do not be anxious. And then he gives us the antidote to anxiousness. And that antidote is the peace of God. Verse 7, it says, the peace of God which surpasses understanding. Funny thing about peace, I think oftentimes when we pray to God for peace, what we really want is we want the peace that brings understanding. We want to know why this difficulty is happening to us. We want to know why this person is sick, or why this person broke our heart, or why our friend turned their back on us. We want peace of God that brings understanding, but that's not what we're promised here. The peace that comes from God, true peace, is a peace that goes beyond understanding. It surpasses all understanding. And this peace that we can get from God, Paul says that it does something. He says that it will guard your hearts and your minds. That word guard there is the same word that's used in other places that talks about an army. And the idea there is that an army is guarding the city, surrounding the walls, protecting it. You can sleep and rest easy knowing that there's an army outside guarding the walls. And the same is true for us. If we know that God is guarding our hearts, we can rest easy, even in times of difficulty. And so in this lesson, I want to give us two disciplines that I think Paul gives that can help us find and develop the peace of God in our own hearts. The first is this. The first is thinking on godly things. Thinking on godly things. Look at verse 8. Look at verse 8. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. Okay, the meaning of the word think there is more than just kind of this passing thinking about something for just a moment. That word thinking actually has to do with pondering and meditating and letting it dig deep down into your brain and rest there. And so Paul's advice here is that this peace of God is with you. And I want you to remember this, that peace is not the absence of something. Peace is actually the presence of God. It's found in the presence of God. Oftentimes when someone maybe is trying to give some helpful advice in how to get through a difficult time, they might say, hey, just don't think about it, or don't dwell on those negative thoughts. And there's some benefit in that. But I think there's also a problem in it. If we don't ever think about these problems or difficulties that we have, if we try to avoid thinking about them, we're not living in reality. Those difficulties, those trials, those things that we're dealing with that are causing us stress and worry and anxiety, those things maybe are facts of life, and we need to deal with them. Paul here says that we get a living power that allows us to triumph over and through those facts, those things that are happening to us. And so the peace of God that we are promised is not the absence of those problems, but what it really is it's a presence of God in our lives. You know, sometimes bad things will happen to us, and maybe that catches us off guard. It happens unexpectedly. Maybe we don't really feel prepared for it. But we do have something that allows us to triumph over it, triumph over those difficulties that are coming our way. So if the first discipline in developing the peace of God in our hearts is thinking on godly things, the second is this, thanking God for working good in all things. If you go back to verse 6, listen to what it says there. It says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your request be made known to God. You know, what's interesting here is the order that Paul puts this in. He says, make your request to God and do it in thanksgiving. That seems backwards to me. You would think the order would be, you make your request to God, God answers your request to him, and then you thank him. But that's not what Paul says to do here. Paul says, make your request to God, and then thank him for what he is going to do. And the reason for that is we can be content in knowing that God has a plan for us, whatever that plan might be. Romans 8:28 talks about this idea of God working good in all things for those that follow him. And so we need to trust in that plan, and that can give us peace that God is going to work things out for our good and for his glory. This idea of thanking God for working good in all things can be difficult. And the reason for that is it's difficult to thank him for things that aren't going well, or that are difficult, or that are troubling. And especially when we're looking at a situation and it doesn't seem like things are going great or things are going well. But I want you to think of this example with me. Let's say you were there the day that Jesus was crucified. I'm glad I wasn't there that day. But let's say that we were there together. And let's say we knew something about Jesus. We knew that he was a good man and a good teacher. Maybe we thought that he was going to do amazing things. We had seen him do amazing things, healing and doing miracles. And we see him on that day being crucified. And maybe at that day, we look at that and we think, what good can come from this? How could this be part of the plan? How could this be good at all? But really what we'd be doing is we'd be looking straight at God's most powerful work when it comes to redeeming the world. And at that moment in time, it might have been difficult to see what God's full plan was going to be for the rest of history. But God has a plan. And the same is true for us today. In the middle of times of difficulty and trials and problems, we might not understand what God's plan is. But the peace of God goes beyond understanding. And so we're able to have peace. We're able to find peace because peace is not found in the absence of fear and problems and worries and stress, but peace is found in the presence of God. And so I want you to think about the question at the beginning of this lesson, that question of what is it that you desire the most right now? And I hope that your answer is the same as Moses' answer would have been, or the same as what Paul understands. And the thing that you desire most of all right now is the presence of God. And the reason for that is because when we desire the presence of God in our lives, that's the secret to contentment. That's the secret to being able to rejoice even when things are difficult, even when things aren't going the way that we want them to. The presence of God in our lives gives us the peace that transcends understanding and lets us face whatever it is that's going to come our way. So my challenge for you is to seek the presence of God and aim for peace.